When I was 17 or so, two friends and I decided to camp in the field next to my housing estate so we could drink beer and listen to music as loud as we wanted. This was a huge grassy field on a slight hill, where all the surrounding houses were far enough away so we wouldn't disturb the neighbours. We also couldn't be seen by anyone unless they're extremely close to our tent. It became late, and my two friends had fallen asleep. I was having trouble sleeping around this time, so I laid there, awake. Around 3 a.m, I heard the distinct sound of grass and vegetation as someone walked out on it outside of our tent. I was stunned with terror, for one, because this is a private field owned by a farmer who would probably be angry to find us there, but more so, I didn't hear anybody approaching. Just suddenly, somebody's outside the tent. I held my breath out of fear and shock, which is when I heard another set of footsteps belonging to a dog. Filled with dread, I just laid there as still as possible, breathing slowly and quietly, listening to the person and his dog walking back and forth outside the tent. I thought we were going to get shot or beaten. Then, I saw the guy's shadow. This freaked me out a lot more. It was huge, looming over us at every pass by our tent. I couldn't see the dog's shadow, even though I heard it making increasingly erratic circulations of our tent. This carried on for around 5 minutes, although it felt like much more time had passed. The shadows disappeared. The sounds faded away. They didn't leave or anything. It was more like they were walking outside of the tent, but somewhat lighter this time. When I was sure that the sounds had ceased, and there was no threat waiting outside, I freaked out and my friends, still as quiet as possible, and said that we had to go because somebody knew we were here and we could get in trouble with the owner. I told them everything that happened. They never believed me, thinking I dreamt it. I assured them I hadn't, and we had to leave right now. They tried to get me back to sleep, ignoring me because they're lazy as hell and didn't want to pack up everything and go. I gave up too, even though I knew that they'd never get to sleep. 10 minutes later, the sounds returned, just like the volume outside the tent had been turned up gradually. I felt the same sense of dread as before, and whispered one of my friends' names so they could wake up. Shh, one said. They already heard it, and told me to open the tent to see who was terrorizing us. I did so, slowly easing my hand out of my sleeping bag and up to the zipper. It probably took 5 minutes to reach it, just so I was sure not to make a sound, and pulled it down so violently I nearly ripped the whole thing in half. There was no one there. We got out within the space of 5 seconds. There was nobody anywhere. As I mentioned, we're atop a hill in the middle of a field, and so we could see anybody for miles. There was nothing. So this happened maybe 20 years ago, when 3 friends and I went camping at a Kentucky lake. So we had just settled on a campsite after hiking maybe an hour from where we parked. It was on a small inlet, maybe 300 yards long, 150 yards to the opposite shore. We had it to ourselves and camped near the U-bend of the inlet. so we had a limited view of the lake proper. We could see it to the left, but it was mostly blocked by the trees on the opposite side of the little bay. It being relatively hot and humid, we were all standing in the water after having set up our tents and such. The sun had gone down maybe an hour earlier, so there was still a little light left. I think it was early summer or late spring. So we're standing there shooting the breeze, up to our shoulders in water. It felt great. Suddenly, above us, there was a meteor-like fireball that lasted maybe 2 seconds at most. It appeared to be very close, but there was no way to be certain. We saw it fall behind the opposite spit of land, and presumably land in the lake. Immediately afterwards, the entire lake lit up, seemingly, from the bottom. Seriously, all the water visible from where we were standing, including our little inlet and the proportion of the lake proper, lit up like the entire floor of the lake. It was as if it was made out of spotlights. It flashed twice or 3 times and went out. There was no accompanying flash or sounds or whatsoever. A few seconds went by when one of the guys asks, "Alright, who else saw that?" Which was followed by an evening of us all theorizing what it could have possibly been. To this day, none of us have any idea what it was, but we all saw it. It's easily the most strange thing that I've ever seen in my life, and I'm probably never going to see it again. When I was younger, around 10 years old, I went camping with my family. I'll just get right into it. It's about 2 in the morning. I couldn't sleep. The tent me and my brother were in is really hot and very uncomfortable. Anyway, while I was trying to go to bed, I heard a very faint whimper. I tried to ignore it because I figured I was just tired. Our campsite was along a road with many other camps nearby. The whimper started to get louder and louder and turned into crying. I heard footsteps outside and a girl screaming. Now, let me tell you, it didn't get fainter or anything, it got louder and louder, remaining in the exact same spot the entire time. This is important because it indicates she was looking at us, crying. It gets worse though. It turns into a full scream for seconds straight, then cuts out. When she started screaming, my brother woke up. We both looked at each other and put our pillows over our head. Eventually the screaming stopped. I couldn't sleep at all that night, and when we got outside our tent, there were footprints everywhere. I was just glad that we were leaving the same day. Not necessarily camping, but in 1999, I was with some friends hunting deer in NW, Wisconsin. I'd just seen the Blair Witch Project a few weeks earlier. We each headed to our stands in pitch dark at about 5:30 AM. The woods were dead calm, no wind, no moon, and a light snow had fallen the night before. It meant it was pitch black. I walked alone in the dark, and when I got about 20 yards from my stand, a deafening scream shattered the silence. Not just once, but it kept on going. It sent shivers down my spine. I was terrified. It sounded like somebody crying and somebody slowly killing another person, but it went on for like 15 minutes. I grabbed my gun, headed up the ladder. Finally, it stopped. I didn't get down. I stayed up there, terrified. The thing is, No one else heard it. A couple of years ago, my brother brought a large piece of land out in the middle of nowhere, about 30 miles or so from cell reception. It's quiet, there's no light pollution, and no paved roads, and not a lot of people around. Shortly after he brought the place, two of my brothers, the landowner and another, me, and our families spent a weekend camping on the land, doing our very best to clear it up. People would use it as a dump. There were many downed trees, etc. On the second night we camped there, I awoken in the middle of the night to take a leak. As I walked to the bushes in the dark, I realized that I could faintly hear music in the distance. That didn't strike me as odd, because I knew my brother had a radio in his camper. I finished up and went back to sleep with no further thought on the matter. The next morning at breakfast, I mentioned the radio and music. Several other people recalled hearing music during the night, but no two people heard the same music. Finally, the brother who brought the radio woke up. I asked him about the music. He seemed a little bit freaked out. He woke up some time to go and smoke. He heard music as well and assumed it as somebody else. I should mention that he was the only one with a generator and a radio. It wasn't this radio that we heard, and it wasn't anybody else's either. I've been back there several times, but I'm a bit freaked out by the place at night. I have fun while I'm there, but I'm always armed and don't sleep in a tent anymore. I sleep in my SUV and lock the doors. It may sound kind of stupid, but realizing that everybody heard different music with nobody else around, no reception and no radios, electricity, that's creepy. I spent a lot of time camping, on the beach, in Yosemite, all over California really. But one particular Friday night, my friends and I decided to camp in the woods near Hicks Road, a notorious road for the fatal car accidents, squatters in abandoned homes, etc. This is about our third time camping up there. The last few times we heard some freaky noises, but nothing really awful. So we pitch it in a small clearing and plough through a taco 12-pack before we crash out. I fall asleep no problem and wake up to the sound of what seemed like people arguing outside of my tent. It's around 4:30 in the morning, and I stand up slowly and peek out into the darkness and just see a massive black mass move. Looking through our tents, I see there's about 7 of these giant masses. Once my eyes adjust, I finally know exactly what the hell they are. They're wild boar. I sat down in complete and utter silence for about an hour while I hear these 500-pound animals scrambling around the tent. So close I actually hear them brushing on the fabric. Eventually, they all left. I really hate to think of what could have happened had I stepped out and investigated further and not realised till it was too late. Two years ago, we were camping at a place called Lake Glubon in Australia. Now to set the scene, 2 mates were sitting around a fire. One was getting something from his car. I was passed out in my tent, and another mate was down at a tap rinsing his plate about 50 meters from the fire. He got smashed in the head with a beer bottle. At first, they thought it was me, thinking I'd drunkenly stumbled out of my tent and thrown the bottle. They went and checked I was out cold. There was nobody else in the camping area. Hadn't seen a single person since we had got there. What really freaked us out was not only that there was something paranormal, but it had enough force and aggression to be able to throw a bottle at him. This happened to me when I was little. I went camping with my older brother and mum. I was about 8, and I went to bed at around 10 in a sleeping bag inside my tent with both my mum and brother. Sometime during the night, I don't know when, I woke up, somewhere in the middle of the woods, still in my sleeping bag. I had no idea where I was, or where my tent was. I screamed. I heard my mum calling back for me in a panic. She was easily 200 yards away. To this day, I have no idea how I ended up in the middle of the woods, still inside my sleeping bag, asleep. It still gives me chills to this day. Imagine a 1984 to 1985 time frame. It was a break from college, and a group of us decided to go on a week-long raft trip. The river went through a Native American reservation. The nights were clear and beautiful. The river was slow and manageable. Everything was going pretty well, up until the next to last night. We finished our dinner, put everything away. My travel mates had snuggled into the tents. I stayed out to stargaze for a while, trying to identify different constellations because we had no moon. We were miles away from the nearest light pollution. The night sky was gorgeous. That's when I saw it. At the edge of one horizon, a huge, bigger than the moon, huge white light. It shot across the sky, faster than a plane, and disappeared below the far horizon. It took maybe a minute to transverse my entire sky view. I yelled for my friends to come and look, but by that time it was long gone. To this day I have no idea what I actually saw. A few years ago, I was camping in the Everglades in Florida with a few friends. We all had gone into our separate tents and were starting to fall asleep. The area was pretty noisy with bugs, crickets, birds, etc. I heard this low vibration, sounding almost like a roar. It was powerful enough to vibrate my chest. Suddenly, everything in the forest goes quiet. No birds, no bugs, nothing. About 30 seconds later, my phone vibrates. It's my friend in the other tent texting me, asking me if I heard the same thing. The four of us kept on texting each other, wondering what it was. About 10 minutes later, all the animals slowly started making noises again. I slept that night with my machete under my arm. I was in a cabin with 4 other people. I woke up at about 5 a.m. They're all sleep talking at each other, like straight up arguing, grunting, mumbling, shaking, and everything else a person mid-sleep would do. Only 4 of them were actively engaging in some kinds of primitive sleep talk at once and towards each other. It scared the hell out of me. I didn't know if they're messing around, and I've never seen anything like it before. In the morning, I told them about what happened, and they didn't remember a thing. I really don't have any explanation for this, and it really terrifies me. This wasn't exactly camping, but I managed a resort in the Andirak for several years. The place is old and rustic. It smiles from civilization and very peaceful. It was built in the 20s and had somewhat of a sordid past. It was built for a Canadian senator who would run rum down from Canada during the Prohibition. We still had the under-the-ground lock safe from where he would store the booze, as well as hidden booze hiding areas underneath some of the cabins. Calvin Coolidge stayed at a camp across the pond during his residency, and would visit my camp, for spirits I'm sure. Anyway, I met a girl and decided to sleep out under the stars. It began raining, so I suggested we slept on the screen porch in the boathouse, which I thought was a pretty good compromise. So after we're all set up, it's getting pretty late. It's about 1:30 AM or so. We're laying there. I tossed and turned because I couldn't sleep. I have a hard time falling asleep while outside. We laid there for about half an hour or so when I heard the bathroom door open in the boathouse. It could have been anything else but that door. Now my first thought was that it was my boss, the owner of the camp. She is notoriously nosy and has been known to spy on the staff at their quarters. So I thought it was probably her who made the noises. But then again, why would she have been hiding out in the men's bathroom in the boathouse for over an hour? That would be far beyond my comprehension. I proceeded to hear footsteps walking across the boathouse, down 3 stairs on the dance floor, and stopping right in front of the door to the screen porch. I lay there just waiting for the door to open. I called my boss's name, and as the minute stretched out, I started praying that she would open the door, walk away, sneeze, or anything. Nothing. The rest of the night I stayed up, stiff and straight as a poker in my sleeping bag. No receding footsteps, no door noises, nothing. Now the next morning, my girlfriend, she wasn't at the time, but she was 4 years that followed, rolled over to me and immediately said to me about the footsteps from the night before. She had also stayed up all night waiting for some other unexplained sound to follow the footsteps. She heard nothing. She was terrified, never went into the boathouse again. I unfortunately had to go to the boathouse on a daily basis. Everything was cool during the day. At night, I had to turn off all the lights in the camp. This is something I've done every day for the last 3 years. However, every time I get a sense of dread going there, being alone in that dark boathouse. The worst part is the enormous hanging bed in there in front of the fireplace. It was put there for the previous camp owners to take naps out in the day, hang out on the chains, so that bed can be lifted out of the way for entering guests in the evening. Every single night, the bed was swinging, the 200-pound bed, swinging on its chains in the dark in the boathouse. Never during the day. Up until my last day at the camp, if I went in at night, the bed would be swinging. Some buddies and I went camping by the lake one night. At about 1:30 AM, we heard some rustling in the bushes and just figured it was a rabbit or something. We went over to check it out, found nothing. At about 1:35 AM, a huge pickup truck that was lifted and blaring out loud music drove by, really, really slowly, shining a huge police-grade spotlight on my friends and I. The truck burned out and kept driving. So my best friends and I decided to drive up the road and see if we could spot anything unusual about the truck. We get to the main road, and there was probably 7 or 8 cop cars, lights flashing, and 2 or 3 ambulances. We stop and turn around. I swear it looked like something out of a horror film. A cop peeks on my window with his flashlight out of nowhere. He says, "What are we doing?" We told him we're camping and told him about the truck. He says, "Well, you boys might not want to camp here. We had a homicide and haven't located the suspect." My friend says, "Should we be worried?" And the cop says, "Well, I'm not scared, but there's 20 officers here and we all have guns." I said, "Yes, sir," and tore off back down to the campsite. My best friend called the rest of our buddies and told them to pack up the gear and not to ask any questions, and that we had to go out. We literally threw 2 fully pitched tents in the back of our trucks and got the hell out of there. The cops located the killer about 30 minutes later, at our own campsite. I went camping with some friends in a relatively remote location. We all went to sleep at around 11 PM. Woke up the next morning and all the trees behind our tents, around 100 feet away, were torn down. We checked the weather later and a freak tornado was reported to have popped up overnight. We just got lucky it bounced when it did, otherwise it would have killed us. My wife, dog, and myself were on the second day of an 80-kilometer hike in northern Ontario, the Kilnary Province Park. Set up camp on a point 750 meters into a lake. One way onto the point and one way off the point. We started hearing wolves about 9 PM. We went to bed by 10 and the howls were getting closer and closer. One howled from right behind us on the trail. I got out of the tent and started making noises in an attempt to scare them off. Usually this works for bears. I've encountered a few of them. I didn't see anything there and didn't hear anything after. I was glad. I went back to bed and laid down, trying to act confident as to not upset my wife. Then we both heard something outside of the tent. My dog was crazy quiet, yet shaken. I opened the tent to find a wolf staring at me about 20 meters away. He come about 5 closer. I grabbed my bear spray and took aim. I didn't use it, but I started to scream at the wolf and took a few fake charges at it. Again, usually this works when faced with a black bear if you have no escape. The wolf didn't care though. It kind of hung out for a few seconds, then kind of casually walked into the tree line, just far enough that I didn't see it anymore. I built a fire between the tent and the bush, sat up all night, kept my headlamp on all night. I then had to listen to 5 or 6 more howl to each other every 20 minutes. They were very close. I would estimate that they're within 50 yards away. I was sure they were going to come and grab my dog. At about 6 AM, a bunch of them started howling, altogether way more than during the night. It now sounded like 10 or 12 of them. We waited until about 8 AM, packed up, and got the hell out of there. We were 36 kilometers in. Took us 2 days to hike in. We hiked out in 7 hours. About an hour and a half into our hike, the wolves started howling behind us again. They were following us out. On the hike we even saw a bear and 2 cubs. The hike back was so frantic that my wife actually lost all of her toenails from it. We were very lucky to escape with our lives that day.